Minister for Home Affairs and Justice has the call.
Well, thanks, Deputy Speaker. Can I tell you that the story of just one person? His name's Esmat Aydin, and he worked for the United States Agency for International Development in Kabul. He was one of around 250 people who left Indonesia on a boat to Australia in December of last year. He was one of only 47 people who survived. 200 others on that boat drowned. About 100 bodies were later washed up on the shores of Indonesia. 100 more are still at the bottom of the Java Sea. Last month he told his story to the Australian newspaper, and he said, quote, "People were crying, some were praying, people were looking for each other, some mothers were looking for their children, some women were crying, 'Where's my husband?'" He said the waves were like mountains, children, women, young men, we were seeing them die. And one of those men was his cousin. He told the reporter he was struggling. I tried to get to him, to help him, but I couldn't do anything. This is the human face of this debate. In the last 9 months, more than 400 people have died. 200 people died in December, another 11 died off the coast of Malaysia in February, 90 more died in June, 100 more died only 2 weeks ago. This is what we have to stop. Whatever you think the solution is, and I know that there is a continuing debate in this place, we should all agree that governments should be given the powers that they think are necessary to save lives. That's what's been denied to this government by the Liberal Party and by the Greens. When Parliament last sat in June, the Liberal Party and the Greens both opposed legislation that the government believed would stop boats and stop people dying. That's why we commissioned the Houston report. It makes 22 recommendations, and the government is committed to implementing each and every one of those recommendations. The Shadow Minister for Immigration talked about half measures. Well, the government is the only party in this place that's committed to implementing all of the recommendations of the Houston report. Neither the Liberal Party nor the Greens Party are committed to implementing all of the recommendations, all of the measures proposed by the Houston report. Yesterday, the Minister for Immigration made a declaration, made a designation by legislative instrument to transfer people to Nauru. He also indicated that the first transfer of people is likely to occur in the latter part of this week. There's information in the newspapers today about the number of Australian federal police officers on flights with asylum seekers, and this debate gives me an opportunity to provide some more information to the House. I'm advised by the Australian Federal Police that the overall number of AFP members supporting the transfer process will be approximately 90. The number of AFP officers on individual transfers will vary according to operational considerations and requirements of each transfer. For operational reasons, the Australian Federal Police won't go into any more detail about the arrangements of each transfer. Deputy Speaker, the people of Australia are sick of us fighting on this issue. They want us to work together and they want this fixed. Unfortunately, this debate has been infected by politics, and we've heard more of that from the Liberal Party and from the Greens over the last few weeks. I've been in this job now for about 9 months. On my 5th day in the job, I had to advise the Australian people that 200 people had died at sea. 200 people that had been on that boat with Esmat Aydin. I said then that the Australian people have had a gutful of this and they want us to work together to fix it. 4 days before those 200 people died, the Prime Minister wrote to the Leader of the Opposition and said this, quote, "The Australian people expect us to work together to ensure the national interest is upheld." The Prime Minister said, quote, "We'd be happy to make Minister Bowen available to meet Mr Morrison in an attempt to identify a mutually satisfactory outcome." The Leader of the Opposition wrote back 2 days later, 2 days before the tragedy, and he said, quote, he didn't see much point in the discussions. The day after 200 people died, the government wrote to the Leader of the Opposition again and asked him to allow his immigration spokesman to sit down with the Immigration Minister to reach a compromise. and he still refused. He demanded a new proposal from the government before any talks could begin, and so the government gave him one. Then, before those talks could begin between Mr Bowen and Mr Morrison, the Leader of the Opposition held a press conference where he rejected the written proposal, effectively ending the negotiations before they even got started. Deputy Speaker, these are not the actions of someone who wants to solve this issue. As I said earlier, whatever you think the solution is, we should all agree that governments should be given the powers that they believe are necessary to save people's lives. This is what we've been denied by both the Liberal Party and by the Greens Party. The Shadow Minister asked in his contribution what government members believe in. Well, this debate gives me an opportunity to tell the House that my view on the Malaysian plan hasn't changed. I still believe that it's the best way to stop people getting on a boat and dying at sea. So does the Houston report. It says in the report that it believes this is quote-unquote vital. Angus Houston, in the press conference that he held after he released the report, said that he believes this is the best plan for the future. Paris Aristotle, another member of the expert panel, said in an interview that he believed in the long run, quote, "In the long run, Malaysia is absolutely vital to this," unquote. But it's also absolutely clear that the Liberal Party will never allow it to be passed. So the bill that we debated last month was a compromise. It was the only thing that the opposition were prepared to pass. And so we passed it. We can't be held hostage in this place, Deputy Speaker, to stupid political fighting. This is too important for that. We had two options. We either pass legislation or we don't. We do something or we do nothing. And if we do nothing, then more people die. My view hasn't changed when it comes to turning back boats either. The Houston report makes it very clear that you can't tow back boats when the country that you want to tow the boats back to doesn't agree to take the people back. And this is the case as we speak. The opposition's proposal is to tow boats back to Indonesia. The advice of Angus Houston and his panel is you can't tow a boat back to Indonesia if Indonesia won't let you. And this is what Indonesia has said on the record. Marty Natalegawa, the Foreign Minister of Indonesia, in March of this year said simply pushing back boats to where they've come from would be a backward step. He also said the general concept of pushing boats back and forth would be an aberration to the general consensus that's been established since 2003. Later that month, he was asked a question about this again, and the Foreign Minister of Indonesia said, now, from that kind mindset, and naturally it would be impossible and not advisable even to simply shift the nature of the challenge from one end of the continuum to the other. That's the Indonesian Foreign Minister saying that Indonesia would not agree to towing back boats. The Indonesian ambassador to Australia is on the record on this as well. And in March of this year he said, if you take that policy, it means that you bring all the burdens to Indonesia, and what about our cooperation? A senior Indonesian official in July of this year was also interviewed by the Sydney Morning Herald on this issue of Indonesian permission to tow back boats, and this is what he said, quote, "It's exactly like you're going to someone else's house and throwing dirt there. Why would we take something that's not our property?" So you've got a senior Indonesian official, you've got the Indonesian ambassador to Australia, you've got the Foreign Minister of Indonesia, all saying that they don't support this policy proposition. And you've got the Houston report that says without Indonesian support it cannot happen, and therefore it can't happen. But I also believe that it would be dangerous if it was to happen. This is what a senior naval officer said in the Australian newspaper on the 25th of January, quote, "They'll disable their boats when they see us coming, they'll burn their boats. The policy will encourage them to do so, and it will place lives, Navy lives and refugee lives at risk." And we know this is true because it's happened before. I've looked back and looked at what happened when the Howard government ordered boats to return. Ciev 1 on the 7th of September 2001, naval personnel boarded the vessel, they were threatened and forced to withdraw, and the passengers ended up going to Nauru. Ciev 2 on the 9th of September 2001, 30 knives were found concealed on the boat. Passengers threatened self-harm, and they were also taken to Nauru. CF3 on the 11th of September 2001. Naval personnel boarded the boat and they were met with violence. They couldn't control the wheelhouse. The boarding party then left the vessel and the boat made a hard turn towards the naval vessel, narrowly avoiding collision. They were also taken to Nauru. CF5 on the 12th of October 2001. The ignition key and the fuel transfer pump were thrown overboard and the cooling pump was sabotaged. CF6 on the 19th of October 2001 was also sabotaged. When naval personnel attempted to repair the ship, fires were started, the deck boards were turned up, the boat ended up sinking, and they were taken to Christmas Island. All cases where an attempt was made to turn a boat around and it failed. There's more. CF7, 22nd of October 2001. 15 people dived overboard, others doused themselves in fuel, they damaged the mast and started a fire in the hold. CF9 on the 31st of October 2001, also sabotaged, fuel lines were cut. CF12 on the 16th of December 2001, more sabotage, more fires, more threats of self-harm, more failed attempts to turn boats around. But perhaps the best example of how dangerous this could be is CF36 in 2009. That boat wasn't turned around, but the people on the boat at the time thought that it would be. And this is what the coroner, Greg Kavanagh, said on page 5 of his report. Quote, "A group of passengers mistakenly believed they were to be returned to Indonesia." He went on, quote, "Very shortly after, the vessel's engine was sabotaged and subsequently petrol was spilt into the bilge and ignited." Now, following the explosion that occurred on that boat, Deputy Speaker, 5 asylum seekers were killed. 5 asylum seekers drowned and 40 other people were injured, including several Australian Defence Force personnel who were treated for burns and for other injuries. This could have been a lot worse. Corporal Jager, an Australian medical officer, needed to be rescued by her colleagues after her life jacket failed to inflate and 2 asylum seekers tried to push her aside to get themselves into the rescue boat. Her leg was injured. The coroner said in his report, quote, "She would have died but for the efforts to rescue her." Now this all happened because the asylum seekers thought the boat was going to be towed back to Indonesia. On this important issue, the coroner was unequivocal. He says, and I quote, "If there had not been a warning notice served which suggested return to Indonesia, and if it had not been made clear to the Afghan passengers that they were being taken to Australia and not returning to Indonesia, again the explosion probably would not have occurred." Now, this is the nub of this issue. It's about the danger or the risk caused to Australian Navy personnel and to refugees. And this is why the Australian Navy and the senior Australian naval officers have criticised and opposed the opposition's plan, because it puts their lives at risk. Apart from that, it doesn't work anyway. People smugglers aren't stupid. They know if they see a naval vessel coming and they think that they're going to be towed back to Indonesia, they'll set fire to the ship or they'll put a hole in it, force people into the water and force our men and women to go in and rescue them. Deputy Speaker, I also accept that the Coalition is never going to change their mind on this issue. The important point is the time for fighting on this issue is over. We've been fighting on this issue for 11 long years. We've been fighting about this since the Tampa arrived 11 years ago last month. Now we've passed legislation through this House. It's time to put down our swords and it's time to stop playing politics. Remember what this is all about. 400 people have died in the last 9 months. We've got to stop fighting if we want people to stop dying. That's why we've passed legislation through this parliament. At moments of great importance, when lives are at stake, this parliament needs to work together. That's what we did after Tampa, that's what we did after September 11, and that's what we all need to do now.
Call the Honourable member